Thank you so much, and it's so good to be with you all and to have such a distinguished panel to come and tell us what we need to be doing. And I thought it was interesting, I think we all know that the airspace incursions are a method of destabilizing our countries and collecting intelligence. List goes on and on. Congressman Elsie suggested that we shoot them down. President Trump has. I think if you polled the panel here, you'd probably find a bunch of people that would be in that camp. But the reality is besides doing that, you've got all the other stuff that's going on, the cyber war that's taking place, the disrupting our elections, arsons, assassinations, the list goes on and on. So if you do, take out one, you've still got the others to deal with. You mentioned the sanctions. And I guess what I'm asking is what do we feel like is the best, most comprehensive way to deal with this? How do you make it such that the Russians actually feel, a response from a unified West that actually does help us hurt them?
Thank you, but first of all, I would like to thank Senator Boozman. I was 2 years ago in Arkansas, and this is a good example that we actually bought the HIMARS systems from Arkansas, and also this is a good example how the Baltic Security Initiative added as well value from Estonia is going back to US industry, and now these HIMARSes are working well in Estonia already, so thank you for that cooperation. But yes, what we need to do what we need to do. It means as well what we need to increase our capabilities. We need to actually be committed to our plans. First of all, invest money and the military capabilities. But the problem is aggressor. The problem is Putin. And the only way out is the peace through strength. It means as well increasing heavily the pressure on Russia. We have put on already the 19 packages of sanctions from European Union side. The 20th is already preparing. So we are ready, very close to make decisions to use the Russian frozen assets. We're talking about more than 200 billion euros, which is frozen in Europe. And Estonia has been pushing this process already close to 3 years. And now we see the political willingness to do it in Europe. I do hope that it will happen in December. As well, the European Union has a leverage and opportunity to put tariffs on export from Russia and Belarus to Europe, mainly about energy, which doesn't need consensus. You know, probably our complexity about European Union, about sanctions, we need consensus, 27 countries. But about tariffs, we need the qualified majority, and it's proposed by European Commission. It will hit heavily. So as well, we are very much welcoming the President Trump's decisions on putting sanctions on two the largest energy companies, as well the secondary sanctions. I do hope that the Senate will and also Congress will support these sanction regime, the secondary sanctions mainly, because they are hitting these countries and governments which are dealing with Russia. So I was in a visit to China just last week. It was very interesting. Of course, probably I couldn't change the global foreign policy goals of China, but I was very clear as well. And I asked a question that China is the main enabler for Russia to wage the war. Main economical supporter, but as well we are talking about at least the dual-use technologies which has been given to Russia. And so what we need to do together with US and so on, together with Europe, is that to improve and also to increase the pressure to China to buy less gas and oil from Russia, because Putin's and Russian economy is not doing well. They are not doing well. As well, Russia has not had any kind of strategic breakthrough on the battlefield in Ukraine. Whatever Putin wants to tell, instead of 6 days special operation, he's waging more than 3 years of full-scale war without any strategic breakthrough. So that's why we need to act to support Ukraine, but at the same time put more pressure on Russia. This is the only way, and I hope that we are going together on that direction. Thank you.
Mr. Johnson.
Just to add on the Russian challenges, it's not just that the Russians surpassed 1 million casualties. over the course of the summer, which is extraordinary. And it's not just that the Russians, the average rate of advance is slower than during the Somme, during World War I, but it's also that if you start the Soviet campaign at Operation Barbarossa when the Germans invaded, and you fast forward 3 years and 9 months, they were in Berlin. Today, if you fast forward that same amount of time from the beginning of the full-scale invasion, they're in Pokrovsk. It is a shell of the Soviet Union. I would add that the Russians are vulnerable on the economy. And I think that is an area where that we can exploit. I agree, they're grappling with inflation, labor shortages, brain drain. I think increased sanctions would be very difficult for President Putin. I also think, and I would just add one other area, is a much more targeted effort at identifying and then trying to shut down elements of the shadow fleet, including sanctions against some of the flag vessels that are illegally shipping Russian oil and gas. There are other elements of that, including listing and sanctioning insurers that are providing insurance to the shadow fleet ecosystem. So sanctions and I think a couple of other steps, including the shadow fleet, will start to put a dent in the Russian economy, which is not doing anywhere near as well as Vladimir Putin would hope, and certainly not as well as he's telling his own population.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Further questions, Senator Boozman?
Do you want to?
Sure, I'm happy to add to that. I would just say that there are, I think, symmetrical responses available to the United States and to NATO when it comes to cyber aggression. President Trump has shown in 2018 by shutting down reportedly the Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg that we can punch back in that domain. Maybe it's time for the lights to go off in the Moscow metro for a morning for them to get the message that they can't undertake similar attacks in the West. Maybe it's time to facilitate, encourage, support Ukrainian special operations against Russian positions in Africa if they sabotage us in Europe. Maybe it is time to dial up the sanctions in certain areas to essentially fund or pay for or force the Russians to feel the pain from their own critical infrastructure attacks in the Baltic Sea. And I would add on the economic sanctions front, while I'm not an economic determinist, I'm not a Marxist, I do think that the pain is real. On Friday, the Russian Statistical Agency reported essentially stagnant growth, 0.6% GDP growth in the third quarter over a year ago. Their inflation has decreased a little bit, still hovering around 8%. And I think on October 24th, the last rate cut was to 16.5% in the key base rate in the Russian system, which makes borrowing costs incredibly painful for Russian businesses. Inflation's a problem, economic growth is stagnant, high borrowing costs, and now there's talk, according to the Russian Finance Ministry, of a VAT increase from 20 to 22% next year, which shows that the National Wealth Fund is beginning, the liquid portion is beginning to run dry, and they have a big budget deficit that is yawning and on the horizon. So I think the Rosneft and Lukoil sanctions, which takes about half of Russian crude oil production into attack, will begin to really shape at the end of this week and beyond. And already, just to take one example where this has positive follow-on effects for the United States, the port of Burgas in Bulgaria, which processes about 140,000 barrels of crude oil per day, is now being taken in receivership by the Bulgarian government. It's a Lukoil asset. And instead, the U.S. is forging, through the 3+1 ministerial, I think just this week in Athens, a new vertical corridor energy partnership where American LNG from Athens through Bulgaria up through Romania, Moldova, can go to Ukraine to help deal with some of their natural gas shortages. We are pushing out, in some respects, the Russian energy dominance of this part of the world, and we'll be able to replace it, I think, with the U.S. system, and that's in our national interest.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.